So, hello all together here in House Marion near the Goetheanum, and hopefully many of you in other countries. We are still in these important dates in terms of time in relationship to Dr. Steiner's biography. Today is, as you know, the 24th of September. And just 100 years ago, it was the day of Dr. Steiner's last lecture at the Goetheanum for the workmen. So in the carpentry shop, it was the last gathering for those who built later the second Goetheanum. And most of you will know that they had, in their working time in the morning, a break paid by the Goetheanum, and Dr. Steiner came. And these lectures were different from other lectures because they started with a question, and Steiner asked, do you have an idea? That means, is there a question which came up to you? And this was the last gathering, in fact. And I found it so remarkable when I discovered only recently that the last question in the last lecture brought to Dr. Steiner from a young workman who was not so long on the Goetheanum Hill. And he said he would like to know if there is a knowledge, an insight about what is a human being from, the origin of the human being. So a question towards the world history of what is a human being, where it is from. And this was in fact the last question brought to Dr. Steiner. And I mean, anthroposophy is partly the answer. But I think he was glad to listen to this young man in the carpentry building with this question: where is the human being from? The origins, but not in the sense of Darwin, but in a spiritual sense. And Dr. Steiner started to answer. And at the end of the lecture, he said, now I started to give an answer. So this last official lecture was the beginning of answering the question, what is a human being? And I found this moving, partly symbolic, that Dr. Steiner's farewell, I know there was a last address, you know it better than me, it was 28th of September, so some days later, but in the official dates or it was the last question, and coming from a workman, not from an anthroposophist. So this was today in the morning. But yesterday in the evening and in the 100-year cycle, there was a final and also a culmination of the courses Dr. Steiner started here in September 5th. Over 19 days, 1,000 people, and in fact 5 to 6 parallel lectures a day. You know the story, I think most of you will know, of September 24, that all the priests of the Christian community, all those anthroposophical doctors who could come, all those medical students who could come, all the artists, the actors, the speech therapists who could come came, and all the members of the society who could come came, and all those who wanted to listen the class lessons and were members of the school came. And these groups waited for Dr. Steiner for the opening because the courses were announced. And the last evening was the 23rd of September. And this was the last culminating karma lecture. And in a way, there was a huge tension in the room, not a tension in the sense of aggressivity, but in wondering, because Steiner announced this last lecture. And they all knew it will be special, because he postponed it several times. And then the day had come. And it is very remarkable what we have tonight as a theme, that it's the last lecture, Dr. Steiner, and the perspective. First of all, the historical perspective, but it's not only the past. And I think you all know that it has to do with Plato, and with Karl Julius Schröer, the one, maybe the most famous philosopher on earth until now. Maybe, I don't know, I'm not specialized, but so influential, especially for the Western world, but bridging to Asia or to the Oriental philosophy. This was a remarkable thing in Plato, that he had really an affinity to the East. And a man who is almost completely unknown, but was a companion, partly a teacher for Rudolf Steiner, Karl Julius Schröer. And in a way, to culminate or to bring the Karma lecture to Plato or to the individuality which manifested itself in Plato, was a missing element in the 80 Karma lectures. Because, as most of you will know, or all maybe better than me, that Plato and Aristotle, so these teacher and the pupil, especially Aristotle, was so important for the development of the Anthroposophical movement as a Michael movement in the sense of the Karma lecture. But what about his teacher? And in all these 80 lectures, there was not a talk, no lecture about the teacher, about some pupils. Not only Aristotle, who only partly was a pupil, he was also a genius at his side. But there were other so-called pupils mentioned, but where is the master? And also, you know, and we had lectures about it, the school of Chartres was quite a big thing in the Karma lecture, starting mid of July, but behind this group of teachers was partly Plato, but not there. So where is he? Was maybe a question, I don't know, about the questions of these anthroposophists at these days. And the other moving thing, and then I'll start my presentation, or will give you a preview of this evening now. The second moving thing is that all those who listened to this last Karma lecture realized that it's also part of Steiner's destiny. You can say this is true for all these 80 Karma lectures. It has to do with him and his mission and his task. But here it became, in a way, more intimate, quite close to him. So what we will do tonight here in Edith Marian House, which we did yesterday in German language in the carpentry building, I will give a presentation, short but hopefully concise and clear, about this unknown person, which is interwoven in the biography of Steiner, Karl Julius Schröer, and maybe giving some hints that there is a relationship to this master Plato individuality. And then, without any breaks, I give it over to Constanza Kaliks, and she will go into Plato himself, his works, his spiritual intentions, aspects in 45 minutes. It won't be too long. So we only give some impulses. And maybe at the end, as I realized yesterday, there is missing a third element. It's quite often the case. You have one and the second and then, but the third element, these are you. So the activity of all of you, there is one pillow, another pillow, one statement, another. So maybe you have to come to the third statement to make the conclusion or to bring it further. So Plato, just to mention that Steiner said he was familiar, close to all old mysteries present in Greece, maybe also earlier, and with an incredible capacity of spiritual love, which has to do also with his affinity to the Oriental part of the world. He said he was really, in a very positive way, carrying an element which is not so at home in the Western culture. We can say it maybe spiritual devotion, also spiritual love, and a very artistic person or master. If I say master, I don't mean the inner close circle of the so-called masters, but there are also masters on earth as human beings incarnated, a master from a maybe non-anthroposophical terminus. And maybe if you consider him and his major impact on Greece, on the development of philosophy and thinking, and you wonder, what about the future of this individuality? And Steiner described, I summarize, it was hard for him to find a next possibility to come to earth, or to embody, or to incarnate, because not of himself, but the development of culture, of civilization. He said partly he wasn't happy at all what they made out of the Platonism. So his original impulse and what they made out of it. So we can ask ourselves, how is it for Steiner, what we make out of anthroposophy? And it touches him. It is not just, they can do what they want. And also Plato gave his full capacity. And Steiner said he was touched by the development of Platonism in a not only positive way. Steiner said it was a terrible disturbance for his super sensible soul in the spiritual world. Second, the Roman Empire came. You know, the time of Greece was not over in the 4th century, but coming to the turning point of time, it was no more a culture dominated by Greece, but by Rome. And you all know there was a strong shift in the behavior, in the understanding of what is a human being, also in the understanding of science, if we want to use the terminus science for this time. We can also say the understanding of philosophy, or of what is a human soul and the deepening of the soul. And how is the relationship to the spiritual world? What are ideas? What is the sensual world? So we have all maybe a kind of an inner image of what is Rome, that this is quite an incarnated, materialized culture. Maybe it is too one-sided. But Steiner said it was very difficult for the Plato essence. I think we should a little bit be careful to say Plato is coming back. But Steiner said more or less in his lectures, there is an essence, and this essence, this individuality, is coming as Plato. So Plato is never coming back. This is true for all human beings, that it is not a following up of the same. There is something living in, as a spiritual capacity, as a spiritual being, which then human beings called Plato when they met him as Plato. So it's a little bit always this very common abbreviation about talking about reincarnation, but in fact it is not so easy to define what is reincarnating. But this, however we call it, this individuality has difficulties, but is needed. And in the early Middle Age, there was a first attempt to come down in a Christian culture, in a cloister, in a protected sphere, kind of trying to live in Christianity, which was for this individuality quite a huge shift. It is not only a new religion, there is an enormous transformation. and to accept it and to try to live in it. This was part of this biography, if we call it a biography, because in a way these protected cloister lives, this is a little bit different from what we call now a huge biography. So, but in this time in the 10th century, there was a certain existence of this huge soul, and then going back. And then I said, so urgently needed. And this need became really urgent in the 19th century. Because in a way, as Steiner taught, it was from long time clear that the first Michael age after Golgotha will come in the last third of the 19th century. And the last Michael period before Golgotha, this was Plato's time, together with Aristotle. And now he is really needed that this has to come, but it is very difficult. Not so much anymore because of the new Christian culture. This is partly vanished. I mean, we can really ask ourselves, where is Christianity in the sense of at least the Dominicans living in the 19th century? It was a materialized, if you talk about Middle Europe, a materialized, more and more industrialized, natural, scientific, imbued culture. And there were still a lot of people members of the Catholic or Protestant church, but it has not a lot to do with the Christian impulse. So Christianity was maybe not the problem for this individuality, but the amount of natural scientific thinking and the amount and strength, and also partly, I would say, aggressivity. This was not a silent paradigm. I mean, in the 19th century, and this is a difference from the 15th and 16th century, there was a power behind to bring natural scientific thinking to the world government. So not in the terms of politics, but that, I mean, the leading natural scientists, they had a feeling we have to rule the world. We are those who give the laws because we detected the real laws. And now we can optimize societies. We know how to do it. It ended up in eugenics, in euthanasia, in social Darwinism. This is not in the middle of the 19th century, but the tendency of this power, which has to do with Ahriman, the tendency was there. So the need for this soul to come and to prepare and to help, I would say, and on the other side, how? Extremely difficult. And Steiner said at the end there was a kind of, it was never a full incarnation. Steiner said, this was a person living in the ideas, and this life in the ideas was absolutely natural for this man. You always had the feelings that in meeting him, Dr. Steiner said that he couldn't really fully express by his being. It was only a little bit more the surrounding of the ideas, but it was marvelous. So Steiner loved this man who was extremely left-handed, which is also interesting. From in one of the Karma lectures, I think you most will know that Steiner said there is at least, I don't know if it is really fitting for all human beings who are left-handed, but at least some, it is a kind of a weakness, he's saying. A weakness indicating that in the last incarnation there was full activity with a kind of being exhausted or not being capable to bring it all in. I don't know if it's really fitting for all. I also met other left-handed persons. So sometimes I think we shouldn't take it as rules without exceptions, but maybe as a hint to think about it. This man I'm talking about is extremely left-handed, which is maybe not the most important thing. So we talk about a human being who came to Earth 11th of January, so at the end of the holy days and nights, beginning of the year 1825, quite a city, quite an old city, at this time called Pressburg, with an enormous castle, where Elizabeth, later of Thüringen, was at home. Later on, Caspar Hauser came to this place to search for his homeland, but also Napoleon was there. The river is Danube, what we call the Donau, and many of these regions are so interesting, where it's not a clear nationality, also not one language, but it is Hungarian, German, and Slovakia. So today it's belonging Bratislava, it's Slovakia, but at this time it was one of these interesting cultures in the plural sense. And the family Schröer had a strong inclination to the German language, but there were other influences. And he came into a very protected sphere. And this was for me very remarkable when I did some studies in the family, that his father, his mother, they had all a very strong and direct line to what we call German idealism in the purest form, maybe, or let's say to Goethe himself. So Goethe, which is maybe not only German idealism, because it's partly also realism. It is also not only Platonism, it is also quite Aristotelian from his natural research, if we accept at all these differences as absolute qualities. In Goethe, I would say there was a wonderful balance in between life in the ideas and life in the sensual world with full devotion and with scientific spirit, to see and to see clear and to see in detail and to memorize what you have seen and to be as attentive in the thoughts as in the sensual perception. A wonderful balance, and getting creative out of this balance. We know Goethe, and it's a German writer, and sometimes we can't hear any more of him. So maybe when I grew up at school, Goethe, it was old and it was partly national, but this man never belonged to a nation and never belonged fully to what we call Germany. And interesting that the father of Karl Julius and the mother and he himself, they had this enormous link, affinity, also searching and for desire, I only would say for Weimar. And what is linked to Goethe, so the father directly went to study, not in Weimar, which has had no university, now they have Bauhaus University. At this time, he went to Halle and studied philosophy, theology, education. And he really inspired. It was, he's born in 1791. So this was in the second decade of the 19th century. So in the lifetime, of course, of Goethe and Schiller. Oh no, Schiller already died. But Goethe was still alive, but he never had the courage to go to Weimar. So he kept the distance and studied and studied. Now, the very second deep source of the family is the Greek culture. So the father was absolutely fond of speaking and teaching the Greek language and to read the originals. So Plato and the other ones, the writers, the poets, Aristotle. And when he came home to Pressburg, he opened a seminar mainly for German language and art, but also in the bridge to Greek. And now I could give some hints to his wife, which was not just his wife. She was an own capacity, had a strong link to Jean-Paul and the art of education. I would say this was a third leading thought in this family. Maybe first was Goethe, or all what is related to Goethe, this balance. The second was Greek. And the third was education. Education in the sense to become truly human. They were all educators. And also the mother, she published a book about education. And education meant to get truly human, to become a true human being. And now interesting, they got the son, Karl Julius, born, as I mentioned, in January 1825. And so he was 7 years old when he saw his grandmother once, and she was not crying, but maybe there were tears, and she was going around in the kitchen or in the living room talking to herself, and she was deeply, deeply touched by the fact that Goethe had died. So the message came from Weimar that Goethe had died. So we are in the year 1832, and the little boy was 7 years old. So the grandmother was so touched. And so he grew up in this protected sphere. And then, yeah, of course, school began early because in the family. So he had master teachers at home. So we maybe are not so surprised that he was brilliant in the Greek language, so small, but maybe a little bit astonishing. He was brilliant in mathematics, also very small. We know that this played a major part in Plato's academy. This is not at all a proof of the essence coming back, but a kind of a culture of the soul. Mathematics, this language, and the thoughts. And the parents were totally, they loved the boy. They had a second and a girl, but Karl Julius Schröer, he was for them, maybe the brother and sister hope for them the same, but I only his story, know only his story. And when he decided, I also go to Germany to study theology, philosophy, history, these letters from the parents to the son, these are loving letters. So mother is saying, father is going to the garden every day because he's saying, I perceive his spirit in the garden. So such letters. But I mean, they had their jobs. They were not at all sitting at home and waiting for Karl Julius. They had to do. But in a way, it was a very special relationship as far as I found. So he went the same direction, I said. So Halle, Leipzig, but also Weimar. At least to see. Now, Goethe has died 12 years before, but he came to see Eckermann. He got an invitation to Eckermann, a close friend of Goethe. And they talked a lot together about Goethe. And at the end, Eckermann asked this young student, to recite a poem of Goethe. And he said in the letter to the parents, it was so great, so moving for me. I had to recite a Goethe poem to Eckermann, but we were so together. And it was as being visiting Goethe. So in a way, from a spiritual point of view, Goethe died. But the spirit was still active. And the place was not just a place. And still today, Weimar is not just a place with some old houses and a monument. It's more. And this individuality of the person now, where the individuality is manifesting I would say to a certain extent, was directed by the family, which was a kind of an envelope. I said to you, it was difficult for him to embody, and he never fulfilled. But partly he was there, and the envelope to protecting shelf was German idealism. Or better to say, it was a mixture of Goethe and the bridge to the Greek culture in this. Yeah. So, good. He came a second time with the father. The father visited the son and came also to Weimar. So, because now he had the courage to do it. But this is not the point. Now he has been to Weimar. And now what to do now? And he had a feeling he had to go to Berlin. This is quite interesting. The way from Weimar, the oasis of Weimar, to Berlin. Later on, this was the way from Schiller, but he failed because he was too ill. Schiller had the feeling Weimar, he loved Weimar, but it's too small. Or better to say, the battle of modern times, they can't be won in Weimar. So Goethe stayed there for his whole life. Ortega y Gasset thought maybe better to go for him as well, but he stayed. And Schiller wanted to go to Berlin, but he failed physically. The man we know quite well who did it was Steiner, staying 7 years in Weimar and down straight forward to Berlin. So Schröer came to Berlin, but he did not fail, but he didn't feel welcome. So from a spiritual point of view, Steiner said something happened. I mentioned that Schröer came to Weimar in 1843, 4, 5, if I'm correct. So Steiner said something happened in the culture and civilization in 1843 and 4 in Middle Europe. And he said Ahriman became incredibly present in the human affairs. And in the years 1843 and 4, Ahriman essentially acted. And then he said it was in the Apocalypse course for the priests in September 24 and for the esoteric board of the Goethe. You said Ahriman active, but this was a silent time in Berlin, 1843 and 4. But Steiner said, the results come later. But the major actor was Ahriman. And in a way, if you go into the discussions of the natural scientists in those years, and if you study the textbooks, you can see the shift and also the aggressivity in the new paradigm. I will, because of time, only this point. In a way, he did not go into Karl Lewis, the modern debates of the newest book of Virchow and so on, but he felt unwell. And he said, I don't see any reflection of idealism in this Prussian Berlin, Germany. Better to go back. And in fact, he went back to Pressburg and became the follower of the father. So he overtook this seminar for German literature and so on. And as the father wrote a book, published a book about history of German poetry. So there is a volume by the father, more or less, and a volume by the son. But more and more, father and son felt unwell. They had a feeling, where is this culture? Where is this Goethe? It is gone almost. The new powers are different. But there is a mission. So there's an interesting image brought by Karl Julius in his textbook about German poetry, which was published in 1850. He says, I would like to compare Germany, this Germany I experienced with Goethe and his surrounding, I would like to compare it with Greece. But what is Austria then? And I said, I would like to compare it with Macedonia. Because from Macedonia, the impulse of Greece had to go eastwards. So what Alexander the Great did was to bring it to the Oriental. So he had a feeling that Austria is the bridge to Eastern Europe, which is true. And in those days, it was absolutely true. This was an element where really East Europe, in the best sense, was at the door. So it's an image of a book. So in a way, he wanted to act, but he did not know how. He was a teacher for German literature and poetry, and he had a feeling time is over. Nobody is deeply interested. He became a little bit a ridiculous, adoring figure of a past culture. He said this modern realism, I'm not fitting to it. And then he found a protected sphere. He discovered this is the wisdom of language. So he immersed himself into studies of dialect, German dialects and other dialects, and the folk soul, if you accept this terminus, the folk soul and spirit in the life of the language. And he made huge studies and was in correspondence with Jakob Grimm, one of the Grimm brothers. And he was especially interested if there are old testimonies, old expressions of this older part of the language. So dialect is an older part. And then he discovered, I saw it in the newspaper, there was an article, The Mystery of Oberufer. It was an article in the Pressbogen newspaper, The Mystery of Oberufer. And while some of you will directly understand, the Mystery of Oberufer were the Christmas plays of Oberufer. And he heard from these plays since he was a child, but never had a chance. And for a long time, they were not performed. But now, we are in the year 1853, December. It was announced in the newspaper that there is something. So he took a carriage and went to Oberufer, which was at this time an hour. When I visit only one time in my life, as far as I remember, I've been to Bratislava. I was invited for a lecture, and I chose the topic Felix Kogutsky and Karl Julius Schröer. And I went to Oberufer, and I was shocked because it's part of the modern Bratislava, and it's full of skyscrapers. I mean, skyscrapers in the sense of East Europe, Bolshevistic. It is not as elegant as New York, Manhattan, but quite high. And so I felt completely lost in Oberufer. There was no, but I went to the graveyard, and there I found some of the names of the actors of the plays, because I knew them from a book of Schröer. David Malatic, he was the leader of the play. He was a peasant, he was a man doing agriculture, and he was the leader. He headed the right from the father, and he had the papers, and he had the clothes, and he organized the play Schröer saw for the first time. And I found on the gravestones some of the names. And also there was a little exhibition in the town hall about the Oberufer place. Interesting. Yeah, but back to Schröer. He discovered a spiritual Christian element in the life of the soul, in the genius of the language, and he was completely touched. Maybe he could not understand why he is so touched, because there was a trace for early Christianity living in the real soul of human beings. And he was mainly interested in souls, spiritual soul questions. And this mixture of language and the spiritual impulse as the Christ mystery. So, and most of anthroposophists know that he was the man who published this place. He got, after long discussions, conversations with Malatich, the right to publish them. And where? Clear, in Weimar. First, not in a book, but in a journal, which was called the Weimar Journal for German Studies or German Literature, and as a book in Vienna, in Wien. This was maybe Schröer's last hope, Wien. Also Paul Celan in Czernowitz, the hope was Vienna. But we are here earlier. He had a feeling there is no progress in Pressburg, nor in Budapest, where he tried to become a professor at the University of Pest. They were divided, but maybe Vienna. So the book was published about Oberufer in Vienna, and not because of the book, but he became a job in 1861, in January, to become the director of the Protestant schools of Vienna in Austria. The Protestant schools were the minority, the Catholic schools were the majority, and he became the man. And interesting also the place, Karlsplatz, in the middle of Vienna, and beside next door, next building, was a polytechnical institute, a technical university. So he came in and overtook the job in March 1861, and Steiner was born in February 1861 and came at the beginning of the Michael Age. That means in October 1879 as a student next house. And at this time, Schröer was happy because he got a little professorship in this technical high school, because he was happy because he had a feeling if such schools became pure engineering schools, then you can't save culture anymore. Then these engineers of the future, they only have a mechanical thinking. So we have to bring the impulse of the ideas, the spiritual world, in the sphere of mechanical thinking. And so Steiner, when he started, heard lectures of Schröer about Goethe and Schiller, and so he came into this materialistic, natural scientific, and he met at the same time a person who was really knowing Goethe, almost personally, but at least very from the inside, from the spiritual, mainly, I would say, Platonic impulse, but I don't want to use it too often now, but not from a point where Steiner became more and more interested. Goethe as a natural scientific researcher. This was unknown for Schröer. He was fond of Faust, the fairy tales of Goethe, and he became the editor in a new Goethe editions for parts of Goethe's work, but not at all for natural science. But Steiner came quite often to Schröer, also privately, because he was invited to the professor, and talked to him about Goethe's theory of colors and so on, and his own thoughts about it. And in a way, Schröer thought, oh, this is only a hobby, as we call it. This is maybe, but Steiner was so powerful in proving, no, this is methodological, approaching science. Goethe was as a genius also in this field. And then Schröer thought, maybe I should advise this man, this student, as an editor for this part of the new edition, which has to do with natural science. very interesting. And he published a foreword. And in this year, he gave a lecture 50 years after Goethe died. That means in 1882, he gave a lecture about the importance of Goethe for the future. And he said, maybe there will be a strong impact of Goethe in the future of science. And Steiner said later, he did not know what he's saying, because in a way he had no clue of it. And he was very shy. He didn't want to have this intellectual, scientific world. But he opened, first of all, he opened Goethe and also, I think, Greece, I mean, this culture behind Goethe and this wonderful element of harmony and balance to Steiner and Faust, which is in part 2, quite going deep to Greek, not only history, but spiritual history. And partly Goethe, but not this part of Goethe, which has to do with a kind of a new approach to nature in a scientific way. And last point, and I will really come to the end, not this what Steiner felt in Goethe, that behind Goethe there is also the question, what is beyond nature? I mean, the riddle of man can't be solved by nature. If you're looking for the true human being, you won't find him in nature. So in a way, and you won't find freedom. The idea of freedom is not, you can't detect it by, so there is something beyond. And in a way, Steiner, from his first writings, was not only following Goethe's path, but also the philosophy of freedom and the element of where is the true human being, and unsolved questions in Goethe's impulse. And there Schröer was quite shy. And in a way, he did not know if Steiner is following the right line or being too self-conscious. But he enabled him to go to Weimar, to overtake the next responsibility in Weimar, and to become the editor in the Sophien edition. And he visited Steiner in Weimar, quite interesting. Now he came to see not his son, but a kind of a pupil who is much bigger as the teacher in this case. But Steiner said, he was my dear teacher and friend. And he said in this lecture or in other lectures, he can't finish his thank. So he is so grateful to Schröer. And I think we can understand today the mystery, the composition of biographies, not only that Schröer's own biography with this impulse, but also now touching and meeting Steiner and enabling Steiner to take it over, but to go to natural science and to go also to a kind of Aristotelian methodology of studying nature. And the last sentence is that Schröer founded a Goethe Verein, a Goethe Club in Vienna. And in this Goethe Club, Steiner gave his first famous and important lectures. I only want to mention 2 of them. It was not the first, but it was the place where he gave his first lectures about the tale of the lily and the green snake. So his spiritual interpretation of it was first opened in this Goethe circle in Vienna around Schröer in 1891. But 2 years earlier, Steiner, now 3 years earlier, in 1888, he gave a lecture about Goethe's aesthetic thinking in the same surrounding. And there was this Professor Neumann, this Cistercian monk, who came after the lecture and said, but the seeds of what you have brought is in Thomas of Aquinas. And Steiner mentioned this encounter that the Dominican impulse came back to him by this monk or by this professor, but in between I and you. And this is insofar remarkable because in Dornach he said, you know, the modern Thomistic thinking, this is the Goethean approach. What we do here at the Goetheanum with the Goethean science, it is Thomas of Aquinas in our time. So in a way, there is a strong impulse, an Aristotelian one, but together with a Platonic one on the levels of the souls. And it is so interesting how in Vienna, by the Goethe Club, by the way to Weimar, and the Schröer personality partly incarnated, I would say, Steiner was enabled to go and to take, but not to take in the sense of grasping, but to overtake and to bring it to the future. And there he was so grateful because he was never an initiate who just had it all in his own. No, he took it over and brought it further. And that's what we want to do as well on lower level. And therefore, tonight we try to memorize, to take it over, and to bring it forward. Also, what I tried. And this is the right moment to give the word and the recorder also to Constanza Kaliks. And partly it's going back, but partly it's also you will feel and see bringing further in overtaking the responsibility also for the future of the Anthroposophical Society movement and high school in our time. Thank you very much that we had this time together, and we go on now with this so interesting step to Plato philosophy. And yeah, thank you.
So good evening also from my side. And after this big view into this individuality of Karl Julius Schröer, who was a teacher for Rudolf Steiner, I would like to go a little bit into this big teacher, not only for Steiner, for Schröer, but for the whole Western civilization, as we already heard, Plato. We can say that all thinking, or almost all thinking and understanding of the world, most of the reflections on knowledge and the possibilities of the human condition can be traced back to Plato. So his thinking was also the base to make it possible for Christianity to become a philosophy, to become something more than the narrative of a happening in ancient times in this place in Palestine. It became later, through the centuries, a whole construction of thoughts that means it was possible to go with thinking and with understanding deep into that what happened. And this is thanks to the ground that Plato's philosophy, Plato's thinking enabled. And we will come back to that. Plato was so far really a teacher for our Western culture until today, in many senses. He was also the teacher for many years, for 20 years, of Aristotle. Aristotle studied with him. And then Aristotle took his learnings and transformed them and made his own work. And Plato is a teacher in many, many senses. He's also a teacher in the method. The way he brings the content, the way he brings the seeing and understanding of the world to his pupils, to those who are around him, to his friends, we can say, is the way of dialogue, of talking, of developing knowledge in the actuality of the in-between with those who together are looking, are seeing what is there to be seen, what is there to be developed and discovered. And so the dialogue is not just an outer form. If we read the dialogues of Plato, we will see that they are real dialogues. He is really talking to real people. Some of them are kind of creations, but many of them we know that were real people with real stories behind them. And he takes in the dialogues the arguments of those who are talking with him, and in the exchange, the thoughts came into light. He teaches us that. So he is a teacher in the method. He is, of course, a teacher in the content, in his legacy, and he's a teacher in asking questions. Yeah, Rudolf Steiner learned also with and from Plato. And we can see that, I would say, this dialoguing with Plato's way of seeing the light of the world in many, many moments of the lectures and the writings of Rudolf Steiner. This is not the topic of today. The topic is to go a little bit into the Phaedo, into this very well-known dialogue of Plato. But we can see that this learning is not a learning just once by Rudolf Steiner. And it's very interesting also to read in this very important book of Martina Maria Sam, who put together all the books that were in Rudolf Steiner's personal library, to see how many books Steiner had from Plato. And until 1922, he takes new books, new editions, new translations of books he already had before. So he stays learning and reading Plato. Yeah, and very early we can say, 1901, 1902, Rudolf Steiner will speak about Plato. He will give lectures in Berlin about him. And some of these lectures then he will write them down in this publication, a very well-known book. It's GA number 8, The Christianity as a Mystical Fact and the Ancient Mysteries. And in these lectures, there were many lectures, 24 lectures on Christianity as a mystical fact, and they were held in Berlin in between October 1901 and April 1902. In these lectures, he will address specifically some of Plato's works and Platon's idea. And I would like today, very shortly, very briefly, to bring a little bit of that, what Rudolf Steiner says about Plato at that point. He will refer to Plato in many other places and moments. I would like to bring some of the thoughts on these lectures. Then I would like to give as an example of that what Rudolf Steiner also says in these lectures about Plato as a ground for what will then come as Christianity in philosophy. And the example will be through another thinker that came later as Rudolf Steiner, and this is Simone Weil. I will bring briefly something on her writings on Plato and Christianity. And then finally I will arrive on Plato himself And I would like to bring short passages from two of his many, many well-known dialogues. One is the Phaedon and the other one is Timaeus. So this will be a brief moment today about Plato. So Rudolf Steiner describes in these lectures that for Plato, this realization that the soul is an eternal being, that the soul is not a being that would die with the end of the earthly life, but will still survive, so to say, and have duration, that this was not something to be proved logically. Even though we read in the Phaedon, in this dialogue, where Plato takes what Socrates will say about the eternity of the soul, the immortality of the soul, even though in this dialogue Socrates will speak about proving the fact of the soul's immortality, Rudolf Steiner says it's not about a logical proof. It has nothing to do with logical proofs. It's just a gesture to bring a process into the souls of those who were around Socrates at that moment, and hearing these descriptions to have the inner picture, the inner imagination of this, what was not yet known by themselves, but that could open the experience, the sensation for something that is the reality of this eternal being of the soul. So Rudolf Steiner says, for Plato, I read now, the elevation to the actual spiritual world or the realization of the soul is not a logical process, but a real process of the soul. The human being becomes a different person. He ascends and conquers his own soul. Yeah, Rudolf Steiner also points out that for Plato, two things were essential, and one was the possibility to acknowledge, to know, and to gain knowledge in the experience of the eternity of the soul's life, and the other was this relation to eros, to love, as the possibility to connect the earthly reality and this eternal realm in which the soul would stay alive. And this relation in between the earthly life, which ends with the dead, and the eternal life of the soul is given, so says Plato, through the possibility of love. Yeah, and Rudolf Steiner also says something very remarkable about the way, we could also say, today we maybe would say the method that Plato uses many, many times in his dialogue. And this is referring to the unknown things through a myth, through a symbolic approach. And Rudolf Steiner says that the myth, this mythical approach, this symbolic approach, this imaginative approach, is given by Plato not as a narrative of something, but as he says, it's even funny in his lecture, is the same as if you would tell someone about an unknown landscape for the person, a landscape in which you have been already. And then you would describe this trip, the mountains, there is a river, there is a street or whatsoever. And he says what Plato does with his myth is awakening the possibility of experiencing through their own image this realm of the unknown. And he says it is as if you would use a tourist book, a Baedeker. This was this tourist books for the tourists at that point. There exist in Germany until today, the Baedeker. So what Plato does with his mythical descriptions, also in Phaedon, is to awakening the soul for the imagination that will bring an experience of that what he is describing, what he is speaking about. Yeah, and in the 10th lecture on 11th of January 1902, Rudolf Steiner speaks about Phaedon and Timaeus, both these dialogues, as the main topics, as the main works in the whole work of Plato. He says at the center of the Platonic structure of ideas is Plato's discussion on the immortality of the soul, the Phaedon. And this dialogue is perhaps the most important of the Platonic dialogues apart from Timaeus. Yeah. So he wants, what he does, says Rudolf Steiner, is to guide the pupils into the spiritual reality, into the experience of the eternal, and to grasp it on one end, so to lead the students to the perception of the spirit in the sensorial world, so that they become citizens of the infinite realm. So leading them to the perception of the spirit in the sensorial world, so that they thereby become citizens of this infinite realm. And so we can see it is leading them into an experience. It's knowledge as participation, as transformation. Yeah. And then he will say in the 11th lecture on the 17th of January, he will speak about Eros as the mediator between the sensorial and the spiritual world, and how Eros, how the love, can lead from the sensorial world into the spiritual fullness. And then he will say that the work of Plato enables the transition to the Gospel of John. He says, and now I read, Timaeus and Phaedon, which lead out of philosophy into mysticism, are the pinnacles of Platonic philosophy, and these will lead then us to the Gospel of John and to the Apocalypse. Yeah, and then Rudolf Steiner in his lectures will enter Christianity, and he will say in the next lecture that what was the essential, the fundamental fact of Christianity is the fact that, I read, Christianity is direct, real life, life as it presents itself for the ears and the eyes. Yeah, so Christianity was something that happened in a certain moment, in a certain place on earth, and it was witnessed by those who were there, and this witnessing then became the narrative, it became the history. Something happened at that moment in this place. It was not at all a philosophy or a construction of thoughts. It was the witnessed reality for those who had these impressions, who had this experience, who saw what happened, so to say. And these narratives then, in a certain sense, were brought to many, many places. And then we can see that this will become, in the coming centuries, more and more something that wants to be understood, that wants not only to be received as a narrative of facts or of facts for those who were witnessing them, but as something that can maybe more and more be also experienced as something to be thought. And the Platonic philosophy gives the ground for that. The Platonic philosophy, as we will see briefly then, is this philosophy who based the whole structure, in a certain sense, on the longing for eternity in a very special relation in between that what we experience in our incarnated body as the sensorial world and that what we can experience with our soul strength through our thinking as a shining of a spiritual reality, of a non-sensorial reality. And this, in a certain sense, is the, we can say, is the place in which Christianity could then be received and could more and more become a frame of something that can be, at least for a beginning, become into the form of something to be also understood. And we will see that through the centuries, and we have many important actors, we can say, or participants in this transformation of something that was witnessed into something that we will more and more be witnessing with our capacity of our understanding, of our intelligence, of our knowledge. And in the 20th century, we have an example of that. It's a wonderful example that I would like to refer briefly here. And this is Simone Weil, this French mystical thinker, we can say, and social activist and social engaged person. She lived from 1909 until 1943. And I will refer shortly from some texts that she wrote from November 41 until May 42 in Marseille and also in Casablanca. And what she wanted to do was to find the most beautiful, she says, she writes, non-Christian writings on the love of God. She looks for the most beautiful non-Christian writings on the love of God. And then she reads Plato, and Pythagoras. And then she also describes this path in which way Plato will lead her to an understanding of Christianity. And I would like to bring one example that she brings in her book, in her writings. And this example is about the understanding of Trinity. Trinity is one of the, we can say, of the basis of the colors of the Christian experience, the relation of the Trinity. And she will then take texts from Plato and show in which way they lead then to the understanding of a specific passage as an example of her to St. John's Gospel. And it is about the knowledge that already starts with Pythagoras, the knowledge of proportion. We can say the doctrine of proportion. And she writes, Plato used mathematical concepts to teach us many marvelous ideas about God. And then she brings a passage of Timaeus. Timaeus is a dialogue from the very late period of work of Plato. And in Timaeus, I will say just a brief introduction to this very important work, as also referred by Rudolf Steiner in his lecture. Timaeus is the story or the description of the world's creation. And in Plato's world's creation, the act of creation is the act of order. The creator, the demiurge, this is the name that he gives to the creator, he orders the substances that are in a chaotic situation. His act of creation is not creating out of nothing, but he takes what is there, this chaos, and he orders it. And he orders the chaos, the substances, in the ordering them in earth, water, light, and fire. So he will separe the substances and then bring them together again in an ordered way. This is the act of creation in Timaeus, is the ordering of what is there. And this is a very important image for creation, because then we will see that not only the world was created out of this order, and then the world will receive the world's soul. And the world's soul will trespass all these ordered substances. And then the individual souls, the human souls, will be also created, and they are related to this soul that transpasses the wholeness of the cosmos. And the human souls will be on earth able to create order through the capacity of knowledge. Knowledge is creating order. Knowledge is always structuring something that is perceived. And then we see how Plato connects the eternity of the soul with the eternity of the being in the cosmos through this very tiny but very strong capacity of the human soul, thinking, participating on ideas. Yeah, and so coming back, Simone Weil will then quote some lines of Timaeus, and immediately after she quotes some lines very well known for many of you probably of the Gospel of St. John. And I would like to read both, one after the other, as she wrote it in her book, in her letters. So it's Timaeus 31c for those who would like to see it in Plato's dialogue. However, it is impossible to join two things together without a third, because only a mediating bond can form the union between the two. Of all bonds, however, the most beautiful is the one that makes itself and the objects connected by it into one as far as possible. Proportion is there to bring this about in the most beautiful way. For if of three numbers or masses or forces of any kind, the middle one relates to the last one, just as the first one relates to itself, and again to the first one just as the last one relates to itself, then it will follow that if the middle one is placed at the first and the last, and the first and last at the two middle places, the result will necessarily remain quite the same. But if this remains the same, then they have all truly become one with each other. The Gospel of St. John. Holy Father, keep them in your name whom you have given me, that they may be one as we are, that they may all be one, even as you, Father, are in me and I in you, that they also may be one in us. And I give them to the glory which thou gavest me, that they may be one, even as we are one, I in them, and thou in me, that they may be perfect in one. I in them, and thou in me, that they may be perfect in one. Yeah, maybe we could sense this connection. So Trinity, as here we see in the Gospel of St. John, is already, for her perception, and Rudolf Steiner also says that, this is already there as a thinkable possibility given by Plato. And then this event, this what happened, can start to grasp into our understanding. Yeah, I would like now to go to some little passages of Timaeus and of Phaedo. And one very important aspect in Plato's work is the aspect of the light. And we will maybe remember this myth of the cave. It's a very well-known myth for the Western culture, the myth of the cave, in which Plato describes how the human beings see the shadow of reality. The sun is shining behind, and they are looking into the cave and seeing shadows. And at certain point, one of them will turn around and will see the reality, but will also see the excessive light of the sun. And this huge light of the sun will first make this person blind because it's so much light. And then the eyes will turn into the possibility to see this reality, and he will come back. And what if he tell the others that what they are seeing are just shadows? I will not go into the myth of the cave now, just remembering the elements, this huge image of the knowledge of the world as the light of the world. And this is more than just a metaphor, we can say. This is a guidance for the soul to have an experience of this inner light, an experience on that fact that in understanding the reality shines in our own souls again and renewed. Yeah, so this parable of the sun and the light of knowledge is something very determinating, we can say, for the Western understanding of knowledge. It permeates the way we think on knowledge until today, we can say, in a certain sense. Yeah, and so we can see in Timaeus, I will now quote this about the capacity to see. And there we read, in my opinion, sight, seeing, has been the source of the greatest benefit to us, because not a single one of our present knowledge and discussions about the universe would have been possible if we had seen neither stars nor sun nor world buildings. So no one of our knowledge topics could be there about the universe would have been possible if we had seen neither stars nor sun nor these world buildings. But now we perceive day and night, and also the relations of numbers and the concept of time. And we have been inspired to investigate the nature of the universe. And through this, we have advanced to philosophy, which is the greatest good that has been ever and ever will be bestowed on the mortals as a gift of the gods. I read it again. In my opinion, he says, seeing has been the source of the greatest benefit to us, because not a single one of our present knowledge and discussions about the universe would have been possible if we had seen neither stars nor sun nor world buildings. But now we perceive day and night, and also the months and the cycles of the years. And through all this, we have received the relations of numbers and the concept of time, and have been inspired to investigate the nature of the universe. And through these, we have advanced to philosophy, which is the greatest good that has been ever and ever will be bestowed on the mortals as a gift of the gods. So we see, because we see the stars and the sun, we are then able to perceive day and night and the rhythm and time, and then to understand that what philosophy can bring to us as the greatest gift that was ever given by the gods and will ever be given by the gods to the human beings, starting with seeing. But then he also says, God created seeing for us and gave it to us so that we could observe the movements in the world's structure and apply them to the cycles of our own thinking, which are related to them, to the extent that the shaken can be with the unshakable, and so that after studying them carefully and having succeeded in calculating the correct course as it corresponds to their nature, we might, in imitation of the revolutions free from all madness, give a firm hold to those taking place within ourselves. So first we see, and then we learn this, and then we can produce, we can create that firmly as thoughts in ourselves. And then he says, and so the same relation also applies to the voice and the hearing. And they were given to us by the gods for the same reason and for the same purpose. For speech is destined for the same purpose and contributes the greatest part to it, just as the musical use of the voice is given to us in order to make harmony accessible to us alongside hearing. So this is Plato. He teaches through the dialogue. He teaches through hearing and speaking. But the first thing for knowledge is seeing. And all then follows from this possibility to learn to see. Yeah. In Phaedo, and with this I will start to go to the final motive. In Phaedo, we find Socrates in his last hours of his life. So he went through a trial and he was then condemned. And in this condemnation, it was said that he would take the poison and he would die taking poison. And then the last hours of his life, he spends them in dialogue with his friends, with his students, and he speaks about the eternity of the soul. And he tells them about the eternity of the soul facing the coming death. So if we read the dialogue, we can maybe ask ourselves how many hours this dialogue took there. Maybe some hours. That means he's speaking about something he will then experience himself in few moments. And he speaks about the eternity of the soul and that the eternal can be experienced by the soul completely and fully after the soul is not anymore attached to the physical and bounded to the earth through the body. The pure knowledge for Socrates will be just experienced when the soul can totally participate on eternity after the threshold of death. And he speaks that the wholeness of knowledge will be then gained after this freedom, after the freedom that the soul will experience when death is past. And we can, in a certain sense, be astonished on the radicality of this, what Socrates is telling his students in face of the moments that will come also from himself. And I would like to read a little passage of Phaedo, of this final discourse, these final moments in Socrates' life, in the life of Plato's teacher. And just some lines. It is really quite clear to us that if we ever want to recognize something purely, we must detach ourselves from it and see things for ourselves with the soul. And only then will we realize what we desire and whose lover we claim to be, wisdom, when we are dead, but not while we are alive. So wisdom, that what we claim in love for, we will just realize this what we desire, he says, this what we desire when we are dead, not while we are alive. Yeah, the soul then will be able to participate fully in the truth, to participate fully in beauty and in good. But this participation is also given to us, to the human being on earthly life. Through our capacity of thinking and knowing, through our capacity of inwardly seeing, we are able to participate already in life to the reality of truth. And in admiration to the beauty of things, we are already on life, on earth, participating to the reality of beauty. And I would like to close these short thoughts on Plato, on this teacher, with some lines of Phaedo in relation to the participation on beauty. As I already said, I assume that there is a beautiful thing in and of itself, and a good and a true thing, and so everything else from which, if you admit and concede to me that there is, I hope to show you the cause and prove to you that the soul is immortal. For it seems to me that if anything else is beautiful apart from that beauty itself, it is beautiful because of nothing else than because it participates in that beauty. And I say the same of everything. For I would like to say nothing more about it, but only that by virtue of beauty, all beautiful things become beautiful through presence or community. I read it again. Through presence or community, through participation, we can say that by virtue of the beauty, all beautiful things become beautiful. The soul is able to participate, to be part of, and he says, in presence or in community. And if something is beautiful and the soul is able to recognize this beauty, it's because the soul itself is participating in the reality of the beauty. Yeah, maybe this today, to close these moments on the 24th of September, and looking back to this 24th of September 100 years ago, through this lens of teaching and learning. Rudolf Steiner has a teacher, one of his many teachers, Schröer, and Schröer opened him possibilities to see. And Rudolf Steiner learned until the very end, I would say, of his life, still and again with Plato, with his thinking, with his teaching, and he learns also continuously with the main student of Plato, with Aristotle. And as Aristotle did with what he learned with Plato, we can say that Rudolf Steiner transforms what he receives in his learnings from the teachers, and he will create, he will order things also by himself. Yeah, maybe I close with that, and I would like to thank you very much in the name of the General Anthroposophical section that you are here in the House Marion, and wherever you are around. Thank you and have a good evening.